everybody, and a very warm welcome to this discussion on why most candidates are getting polity questions wrong in prelims. Now, I decided to shoot this video because over the last 6 months, most of the interactions and doubt sessions which I have held are pertaining to the polity section, and I have observed a very unique scenario where the students feel that they are very confident about polity section, and when they go and test themselves against questions coming from fundamental rights, legislature, judiciary, executive, panchayati raj, they are doing well. But the same student, when he appears a full syllabus test of polity or a sectional test also, he is not able to score more than 55-65%. When I was a student, when I was preparing for the exams few years back, then the general trend was that polity was a very high scoring section, and a good student who is conceptually strong and factually strong did not face any major challenges in taking his performance up to 75-80%. In fact, it would not be an exaggeration if I say that getting all the questions correct in polity was not such a big deal. Every fifth or sixth person I met during the preparation phase told me that I have PSIR optional, or even if I don't have PSIR optional, I'm getting all the questions correct. So this was something which was visible in few years back. But now what we are seeing that most of the students are struggling to go beyond the 60-65% barrier, and this includes even the PSIR students. So there is something which is going wrong in terms of your polity preparation. Polity, which should have been a high scoring and high firing section, which means that we expect polity to take the burden of environment and history. Polity, rather than doing that, it has itself become a challenging section. So polity में अगर आपका performance is above 50%, 55 or 65%, you should not be very relaxed, because polity is supposed to fire at a much higher rate. So if your polity does not do well, if you do not do well in the polity section, you would be headed into much tougher fights like environment, science tech, history, or general policy questions. So today's discussion is focused on this only, ki why we are not getting high scores in polity section and what we can do from our end to get back on the track. So what are we going to discuss in this video? Why you are not able to score well in polity in spite of being well prepared conceptually, or at least thinking that you are prepared conceptually. Why polity section easily can give you a false sense of confidence. Selective testing, selective vision, selective confidence can be a very dangerous thing. And what can you do to make it your most scoring section? So what actually you can do where it actually becomes your most scoring section, rather than just the perception that I'm good at polity. Now, if you look at the weightage of the subject, you can see that consistently polity questions have crossed the number of 10 questions per year, with the exception of 2016 where they only asked 7 questions, but then you see in 2017 they have bounced back by 22 questions. So the general trend is that the questions are more than 10. They are in most of the scenarios, they are more than 12 or 13 questions, which means that whether you are weak or strong, if you want to clear prelims this year, you cannot afford to ignore polity. You cannot afford to ignore your mediocre performance in polity. You have to take it much, much higher. So before we go into the in-depth of the discussion, some of the major mistakes, common issues, common limitations which I observed after interacting with students was that they are mostly neglecting the factual aspects. The students are conceptually strong. Even if they are conceptually strong, the article number, the amendment numbers, the judgments, the reports, the ministry releases, these things, they are not well prepared. So the moment question goes into a little factual nature, they start struggling with it. They are relying only on the conceptual clarity to get a high score in prelims, which is not going to work out. Then the students are also overly relying on static sources. They assume that multiple revisions and multiple readings of, say, Lakshmi Kant or even D.D. Basu would help them out. Unless and until they integrate their study with current affairs, unless and until they figure out why there is a high probability that this topic would be in the question paper this year, they would not be able to prioritize their preparation, and this is where they are lacking in their performance. Then misinterpretation of tricky language and double negatives. Students are not reading the question paper carefully, the question language carefully. They are not looking at the general statements like all of them or none of them. They are not thinking clearly whether the question pertains to a strict reading of the Indian Constitution, or does it talk about Indian politics in general. Because if the question pertains to a very strict interpretation of the Constitution only, which means that you have to only refer the latest version of the Bare Act. But if the question pertains to the general Indian polity, then you can also include the judgments into this. So this is a fine line which the students are not able to identify. Then superficial reading of core topics like federalism, constitutional bodies. Most of the students are relying that I know the provisions, but how those provisions actually come into effect, what effect they intend to provide, what is the finer understanding, what is the philosophy behind those provisions, how those provisions are applied, what are the enabling acts associated with them, what are the major judgments which have reinterpreted those provisions, and what are the major controversies and news related to those provisions. All of that holistic aspect, all of that holistic elements of preparation are completely missing. And the last issue is that students are going for blind guesswork leading to negative marking. They are using common sense logic to solve questions which rather require a little bit of a constitutional logic. Constitutional logic which can be only prepared while discussing your doubts with your faculty, where the faculty explains you what the provision is, why the provision is like this, what is the philosophy behind the provision, what is the expected outcome of the provision. Unless and until you understand why, how of the provision, simply knowing the provision will not yield you good scores. So these are some of the common mistakes which I observed during my interaction in the past 1.5 to 2 years, and also over my experience of 9 years teaching polity and PSIR mein IGP section. Now, based on my understanding of what kind of questions are coming and where students are struggling the most, I have divided the questions into 4 primary categories, which is core conceptual, provision-based conceptual, factual conceptual, and purely factual. Again, before I go into this classification and I give you my input in this is again my interpretation. There is always an element of human error, and this interpretation can vary from person to person, to take it with a pinch of salt. Now, when we talk about the first category, that is the core conceptual questions, for example, which one of the following statements best reflects the chief purpose, of constitution. So in this type of questions, you need to be very careful about what is the best reflection, what is the chief purpose, and what exactly does constitution do, what is the exact understanding of constitution. उसी तरह से अगर आप देखिए कि if you see the other questions, which one of the following factors constitutes the best safeguard of liberty in a liberal democracy? So you need to have a good clarity about what liberty is and what liberal democracy means. Now, in these type of questions, students who are conceptually strong, they are able to do well. But again, these questions require an exceptional amount of conceptual clarity, which will only come through one-to-one discussions, one-to-one interaction as to what these terms like liberty, equality, rights, duties, constitution, democracy, rule of law, what these mean. So generally in this domain, if you are conceptually clear, these questions are a cakewalk for you. But if you are not conceptually clear, the options appear so similar, so identical to each other, that it is very easy to go into a mistake, and you would not even realize that you have made a wrong choice until you come out of the exam hall. For example, which of the following are regarded as the main features of rule of law? Now, if you know the concept of A.V. Dicey's rule of law, and you also know the Indian Constitution does not carry all of its concepts, if we only pick up the 2 elements, not the all 3 elements of A.V. Dicey's rule of law, then you would know what is the answer to this question. Democracy's superior virtue lies in the fact that it calls into activity. So again, it's a conceptual question. The 4 interpretations all might seem correct to you if you are not conceptually clear. Which one of the following reflects the most appropriate relationship between law and liberty? Most appropriate relationship, again, massively subjective component involved here, plus you need to know what law is and what liberty is. So these type of content you will not find generally in your study material or in your Lakshmikant type of books. This type of clarity can only come when you have a very frank and clear discussion with your faculty as to what these concepts mean when we specifically talk about them in Indian polity. You need to have a very clear distinction where philosophy comes to an end and where polity starts. In the context of India, which one of the following is the correct relationship between rights and duties? So not only you need to have a good idea of what rights and duties are, you also need to have a good idea of what they mean in the Indian context. So again, as I said, in these questions, if you are conceptually clear, these are a cakewalk. But if you are not, then they are a sure invitation to go for negative marking. यहाँ पे frank and clear discussion with faculty, conceptual clarity बहुत ज़रूरी है. जब तक आप faculty के साथ बैठ के ये बात नहीं करोगे कि सर ये concept मुझे नहीं समझ में आ रहा है या इसका interpretation ये भी तो हो सकता है और ये क्यों नहीं हो सकता है, unless and until you discuss the ifs and buts of the concept with the faculty, these things will not get clear. So probably you are looking at some sort of guidance which can clear your specific doubts rather than the generic study material. The second type of questions which I would talk about is the provision-based conceptual questions, which means these are a sort of hybrid questions. You are expected to have an idea of the provision, but you are also expected to have a conceptual clarity behind the provision. For example, other than fundamental rights, which of the following parts of the Constitution of India reflect or reflects the principle and provisions of Universal Declaration of Human Rights? So you need to know what were the provisions of UDHR, plus you also need to know what is the content of preamble, DPSP and fundamental duties, and then you need to match whether the provisions or values of UDHR are also available here or not. So not only it requires conceptual clarity, it also requires you to know what provisions exist in UDHR plus preamble, DPSP and fundamental duties. Then the mind of the makers of the Constitution of India is reflected in which of the following? Obviously, you need to know the vision of the constitution makers, plus you also need to know the actual content of all these four, so that you can match whether that thing is available here or not. Then we adopted the parliamentary democracy based on British model, but how does our model differ from that model? So again, you need to know what the British model was, you need to know what is the Indian parliamentary model, and you need to be very clear where does the Indian parliamentary model, which is heavily deriving itself from the British model, where does it exactly stand apart from the British model? So yani, you need to know the provisions, you also need to have the conceptual clarity behind it. Now this was a very challenging question in terms of the election of President of India. Here you would not only require the knowledge of the provisions, also how the balancing of votes between MP and MLA votes is happening, value of votes, how it is being calculated, you also need to be aware of it. So again, this was a provision-based conceptual question with reference to scheduled areas. Now, scheduled areas is a topic which generally students skip because they think it's very easy. With reference to scheduled areas in India, consider the following statements. So they have given three statements related to scheduled areas. Unless and until you are aware what the provision of 5th schedule wants to attain, and unless you are factually aware of the actual wording, you will be struggling in this question. Now, along with the budget, the finance minister places other documents before the parliament, which includes the macroeconomic framework statement. The aforesaid document is presented because this is mandated by long-standing conventions, Article 112 and 110, Article 113, the provisions of FRBM Act. So here, not only you need to be very well clear with the budget process, you also need to be clear what these provisions contribute in the budget process and the macroeconomic framework statement, where does it derive itself. So again, provision based conceptual. Now when we move to the third category of questions, as the level of difficulty increases, you see questions which are purely factual. For example, this question was on the recommendation of who should be made a governor, and they simply asked who gave this recommendation. So all of this recommendation pertaining to governor can be easily said to belong to any four of them. Yahan pe conceptual clarity will not help you. Yahan pe if you know, then you know. If you don't know, then you don't know. So these type of questions are purely factual. Unless you factually you have memorized that portion of content, you will not do well. For example, in India, prisons are managed by state governments with their own rules and regulations for day-to-day administration of prisons. In India, prisons are governed by the Prisons Act 1894, which expressly kept the subject of prisons in the control of provincial governments. Unless you know what regulations and rule position is related to the management of prisons in India, no guesswork, no conceptual clarity can help you. The same logic applies. If you know, you know. If you don't know, then you don't know. Then so this was related to the union government, and Gopalaswamy Iyengar committee suggested something in 1970. Department of Personnel was constituted. So whether these statements are true or not, unless you have actually read about them, conceptual clarity is not of no use. So you can see contrary to the normal perception, proper factual memory based questions also come in polity, and if you do not develop a command over this, then your performance would be capped at 60-65%. Now in India, which of the following review independent regulators in sectors like telecommunication, insurance, electricity, etc. So they have given names of several bodies. Again, if you know what functions these bodies have with respect to the reviewing of independent regulators, only then you can mark this question correctly. Consider the following statements. The chief secretary in state is appointed by the governor of that state. The chief secretary in a state has a fixed tenure. Unless you go and study what are the rule position related to the security and conditions of service of chief secretary, here conceptual guesswork will only land you in negative marking. Again, look at this question. This was related to Legal Services Authorities Act. Unless you exactly know the provisions of how much who are permitted under this act, conceptual clarity is of no use. फैक्चुअल नॉलेज से ही ये सवाल बनेगा. So there are some more examples like questions related to the national flag code of India, ki what is the standard size, what is the ratio of length. Even if it is an easier question, here conceptual clarity is of no use. Factual knowledge, memory based knowledge is what's going to help you out. Another example of purely factual question where you had to match the actions with the act under which it is covered. So unless and until you know about this, there is no way you can score well. So some more examples of purely factual questions. For example, Prevention of Disqualification Act exempt several posts from disqualification on the grounds of office of profit. This you can still guesswork through conceptually, but the above mentioned act was amended 5 times. Whether it was amended 5 times, 3 times or 4 times or 6 times, that you will have to study. There is no way any sort of understanding will help you. The term office of profit is well defined in the Constitution of India. Then again you have to read about it, whether it is well defined or not. Then you have the fourth category, which is the factual conceptual category. In this category, you have to have some facts also, but again, the concepts will also make a comeback. So facts and concepts, even if you are not very good about the provisions, but the memory-based information, the factual information, and the conceptual clarity of the constitutional logic will help you. For example, pursuant to the reports of H.N. Sanyal Committee, the Contempt of Court Act 1971 was passed. So you need to know something about this committee. The Constitution of India empowers the Supreme Court and High Courts to punish for contempt of themselves. The Constitution of India defines civil contempt and criminal contempt. In India, the Parliament is vested with the powers to make laws on the contempt of court. So not only you need to know constitutional provisions, you also need to know the Contempt of Courts Act. Of course, this question could have been done by elimination round also, but for that you require conceptual clarity. So factual conceptual questions का खास बात क्या है कि या तो अगर आपको फैक्ट पता है तो ये सवाल सॉल्व हो जाएगा, या तो अगर आपको कंसेप्ट पता है तो भी ये सवाल सॉल्व हो जाएगा. यहाँ पे योर सिचुएशन इज स्टिल बेटर बिकॉज ईदर द फैक्ट और द कंसेप्ट विल कम टू योर एड. For example, this question pertaining to the recognition of advocates. So again, unless and until you know the provisions, you are going to struggle. So factual भी है और थोड़ा conceptual भी है. Judicial custody को लेकर क्वेश्चन आया था. Of course, you will apply common sense logic, but you also need to know कि what are the exact provisions of judicial custody in India, and you will have to look at the relevant rule position. At the national level, which ministry is the nodal agency to ensure effective implementation of the Scheduled Tribes and other traditional forest dwellers Recognition of Forest Rights Act? You would believe that since it is ministry which is related to forest, but it might be Ministry of Tribal Affairs. So यहाँ पे concept भी काम आएगा, but facts भी आपको याद रखने होंगे. For example, which are the functions and obligations of the Cabinet Secretariat? Logic will tell you कि preparation of agenda for cabinet meeting and secretariat assistance to cabinet meeting would be there, and allocation of financial resources to ministries might not be there. So again, concept will also help you कि you can eliminate one option, but if you have actually read about cabinet secretariat, even that will do the job. So factual conceptual में you have this relief that either the fact or the concept would come to your aid. If you have a knowledge of both, then you obviously will do very well in this domain. So again, after this rapid overview of type of questions which we are facing, what I would advise is कि how you can do well in polity is whenever you are reading any provision, simply knowing what the actual content of the provision is not sufficient. This is obviously required. This is the very base कि what is the actual content of the provision. But you also need to know the philosophy behind the provision, why this provision was included, what did the constitution makers intend by including this provision, what was the background of the provision. For example, if you're reading about 9th schedule, so you need to know the background of land reform laws and why first amendment brought the 9th schedule, what was going on in the country at that point of time. So philosophy or objective which the constitution makers wanted to achieve with that provision, what was the political background under which that provision became important. Obviously, you need to know the actual content, wording of the provision. You also need to understand the exceptions and the restrictions which are placed on the provision, which are very helpful in solving prelims questions. Then you need to know the relevant judgments, how judiciary over the years, if they have reinterpreted it or changed it or modified it, then relevant judgments. If the provision is not able to stand on its own legs, it needs to be implemented through a parliamentary law. So what are the enabling acts and laws which give effect to that provision? Has the provision gone through any major amendment? Why and how why it was amended, how it was amended, what change it went through, and last you need to know why that provision is in news through current affairs. Unless and until you have this much knowledge, you will not be able to solve the questions irrespective of what category they come. So you need to know the philosophy, objective, the background, the actual content, the exceptions, the restrictions, the relevant judgments, the enabling acts or laws which are associated with it, any amendments if they have happened, why they have happened, and what changes those amendments have brought, and how this topic relates to current affairs. If you have this much knowledge, then you can say, if you have this much knowledge, then you can say ki you would be on a good track, you are on the right track to get good scores in polity section. So what is our call to action here? Focus on PYQ analysis, identify what type of questions, what nature of questions are getting repeated again and again. Always prepare your static content along with current affairs. You should have a very detailed and a very timely revision plan, because again, no matter how good you are conceptually, unless you revise it multiple times, the quality of your revision will not be reflected in your scores. Again, as I said, blindly reading the book again and again is not the answer. Revision should be specific to your test performance. This is something which I have emphasized in my previous videos also. Ki whatever you study, you test it, you classify your mistakes and your missed questions chapter wise, you identify ki which are your most vulnerable areas, you reorganize your chapters from weakest to strongest, and you start your revision from the weakest chapters, so that every minute, every second, every day which you spend in revision has the maximum output for your preparation. Then obviously mock tests, simulate exam conditions, and see ki whether you are able to convert your knowledge into actual score during exam conditions or not. And of course you can reinforce through daily quizzes and regular practice. Now ultimately, before we come to the end of this video, the three things which you require to be very good at polity is you need to have a guidance by an experienced faculty, which we intend to provide you at GS Core through our GS Foundation course. The most important thing is that polity requires a lot of practice and revision. So you cannot go and to join a program, or you cannot be in a situation where your polity is not ready when prelims is just few months away. At least your polity syllabus should be wrapped up by December. So again, at GS Core we are trying to create, we have created a GS Foundation course which ensures that all the prelims topics are wrapped up by December, unlike the bigger institutes and the more marketed institutes where the foundation course is running into 13-14 months, and even with prelims few months away, the students have not been completed their polity, geography or economy. We do not want to put our students in that situation, so timely completion of syllabus. And the third and most important thing, polity is not something which can be only taught through sermons and lectures. Continuous interaction, everyday interaction, doubt resolution, cross-questioning, re-examining of things with faculty. You should have a faculty which is so accessible that even the most stupidest or dumbest doubts, no doubts are stupid, no doubts are dumb. But even if you feel that these are the most stupidest and dumbest doubts ever, you still should have the freedom to come and approach your faculty and get those things clarified. As I told you, there are conceptual questions, there are factual questions, there are provisional conceptual questions, and there are factual conceptual questions. Unless and until you know what facts to focus on, and unless and until you have a clear idea of the concept, polity would be a struggle. So continuous doubt resolution, guidance by an experienced faculty, and timely completion of syllabus. These are the three pillars of how you can make polity great again. The subtle reference to President Trump is here. So at the end, how can we help you in acquiring the skills required for all the three stages, whether it is polity prelims, whether it is your mains, or whether it is polity related questions in the interview? What can we do to help? In this domain, I would like to say that we have created a program which is called the GS Foundation course at GS Score. The highlights of this program is that we are going to achieve full course completion in just 10 months. You will be fully exam ready for your prelims by December 2025, and your preparation would always be coordinated. We will be focusing on one subject at a time. We will not be putting you in a situation that half of the polity is done in January, May or April, and the rest of the polity is being wrapped up in December. Once we start a subject, we intend to complete it to the fullest limit. So this is the GS Foundation course. In this course, we would be providing you full course completion in just 10 months, coordinated and organized preparation. We will be making sure that you are exam ready by December 2025. Obviously, personalized mentorship, especially under me, would be provided. And also there is an expert team of faculties at GS Core. We would be focusing for a very piecemeal structured approach for beginners. Answer writing would be a regular part of it. And just like polity, for every subject, we intend to give you a very strong foundation. Test series for a holistic preparation would also be there, and as I said, we will be completing the syllabus in a very comprehensive manner. The current and static parts would be covered simultaneously, and finally our objective is that you have the requisite confidence. By December you are prelims ready and you have to revise and go and give your prelims exam. So that's our intention here. So with this discussion, with this point, I bring this discussion to an end. I hope I have conveyed my point. If you have any doubts, any issues related to your polity preparation or any queries, please feel free to reach out to me via GS Score. And thank you for watching this video. I wish you all a very best of luck, those who are starting their preparation this year, and Godspeed you. Best of luck. Thank you so much.